Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder with another of the talk series, and we're with Jengar here today. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, mate. Happy to be here. I've been making videos for years, mainly RRB and flying and all that jazz. I don't do tanks, but I'm looking forward to this talk. We have been thinking about this plan for ages now, and we finally got around to it.
Yeah, it's it's been at least a couple of months now setting all this stuff up. And the basic thing we're going to talk about today is the idea of AirRB. Now, a lot of other content creators and a lot of members of the community have talked about how there's definitely a decline on the at least player-based side of AirRB. And I think the main issues we're going to bring up today, and then hopefully we can get into some solutions, maybe looking forward with the game. So the first obvious issue is the stagnation of the format of AirRB. So one of the problems being the fact that maps haven't really changed. Even with new maps, the actual objectives haven't changed, and it doesn't really suit anything apart from heavy bombers and fighters. So would you agree with that, or would there be anything there which you would, take issue with?
No, not necessarily. I think it has indeed been very stale the last few years. We've been playing the same format for years and years, and then it really depends on the person whether how long you can find happiness in that, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can put a lot of time in even in this very shallow game mode that we have right now. Because, for example, just to mention one thing, it has a very deep and rich learning curve to AirRB. It takes a lot of time to master, and there is always something to work on. You can find a lot of entertainment in that. I do, for example, but not necessarily for everybody. Those kind of things, and people just get bored, I guess, from the narrow play style that there is at the moment in RRB, because the meta in there is also pretty simple. If you have a good climbing plane, then you get up to altitude and you have a chance to to do your thing. And if your plane climbs less good, then you have to do all kinds of shenanigans to get a good game. And I really would hope they can mix that up a little bit and make it more dynamic, the game mode. That would really be very good for this game mode in particular.
Yeah, the biggest issue I see is when we go to lower tiers, there's a little bit more maneuverability, but that's basically down to the skill of the player. But as you go up in the tiers, it very much feels like it is pretty much about how good is my climb rate? Can I get up to maybe 5k, 6k meters, maybe a little bit lower than that? Can I get there before the enemy does? And can I gain enough energy to be able to outfight them? And that's basically been how it is since I started playing about maybe 4.5 years ago now. And because the maps themselves are incredibly based around the idea of fighter on fighter, where they've tried to add more objectives such as bases, a few more little pillboxes and tanks and stuff here to try and get attackers and bombers, involved in, which, where that would be where the niches that you talked about would come in. But even then, if you look at the majority of maps that we have, maybe only taking out something like Boulogne-sur-Mer, which the majority of the community hate, they're all the same. And I think this is probably the biggest issue. It's not the fact that we don't have a massive selection of different planes. It's not the fact that we don't have enough attackers, light bombers, heavy bombers, fighters, or anything like that. It's the fact that the maps themselves don't really offer anything unless you're in a fighter, yourself, and you're in a PvP environment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what's added to that is that you only have one option. So, for example, you decide to play an attacker and you get a certain map, and you're like, oh crap, my attacker really screwed on this map, and then that's it. And I don't know why they don't mix that more with, for example, what they do with tanks, where you have 3 lives, 3 vehicles, and when you die, you can do something with another tank. That would bring a lot of dynamics in this whole situation, where if you have the option for a bomber, an attacker, and a fighter, and you decide, oh, it's this map, well, then I start with a bomber. I go out, I do my thing, and then you go back and you pick something else up from the airfield. That could put a whole different perspective on the current maps. But I agree with you, the maps are all the same. You have the 3 bases, kill the 3 bases, then you go to the airfield, you kill the airfield, and the thing is over, with no chance to revitalize an airfield or build an airfield somewhere else. There's so much they can add with a little bit of imagination to really change up the maps, and to potentially make every map different, and to also have different victory conditions. Not always the airfield dies and the game is over, but also maybe just something completely different. Kill the convoy and the game is over, or whatever. They could think about a lot of things and try them.
Well, that's the thing. Right now, we have an incredibly test-heavy environment if they wanted it. They've already talked about in the past how they prefer to use events as tests for ideas, and that's basically where Enduring Confrontation got birthed from. But it seems like a lot of the events they've done over the last year have been pretty much favouring ground forces, and I don't really blame them for that. Ground RB is the most popular game mode out of all of them if you just look at the statistics, and on top of that they're also trying to create World War mode, which is, basically based around ground forces with air forces kind of involved. So what I would like is at least maybe every once in a while, kind of like what we have this weekend, because this weekend they are trying out another Enduring Confrontation, a Stalingrad one, and it would just be lovely just to have one of them, but just constantly rolling and have a different map every time with, as you said, some kind of different objective, some kind of even historical objective. I've in the past talked about the ideas of throwing in lighter armored objectives. So you're talking about railways, you're talking about supply lines, you're talking about stuff even like paratroopers and things like that. Just something that's in the game can be changed. Not like map specific things, but basically if you're on a map, and now, like, let's say you go on something like El Alamein, you know exactly where all the ground forces are, you know exactly where they're going, and you know that they're not going to veer from the paths that they've set themselves. For me, creating a much more dynamic battlefield where you have stuff which have different paths, it's a little bit more randomized, would definitely be better from just an interesting point of view. It would actually make you think instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. That will also add the possibility of reconnaissance planes having a real role, and actually they could introduce more of those kind of planes to it as well, because it doesn't necessarily say, okay, on this map there is a column on the left, there will be attackers there, so there's also automatically a few fighters going that way, and with all the maps everybody knows where everybody's probably going to be. On Norway, you have the base on the right has 11 AA guns on it. All the bombers go for that base, except for 1 or 2 attackers that go for to kill a boat. But I mean, it's just all you know it. After a while, you just know it where people are, and people just fly their lines, and 75% of the map is not used, and that's really a shame, because some of these maps are really big, and if you really have to do some reconnaissance and maybe land once or twice because you can't find anybody, well, that would be maybe too boring, but the maps aren't big enough for that anyway. But you know what I mean. If they can use the maps much better to make for more diverse gameplay, and to say, okay, something's going to happen in this quadrant in the next 10 minutes, and then something actually happens there. They could do a lot with that.
And we're definitely seeing that, at least, because everything that we're talking about here is pretty much shown in Enduring Confrontation. which is a game mode they've said is a simulator game mode, but they're still in the testing phases of it. Now, it's been in testing for an incredibly long time, but from my point of view, what they're doing is they're setting up enduring confrontation once they've perfected it, or once they're done tinkering it, to move it over to AirRB, which would pretty much solve a lot of the issues we've talked about here. But still, there would be problems with certain quadrants basically just doing the same thing over and over again. And also, it does add in a lot of other issues, such as, the artificial intelligence going a bit nuts, which has always been a bit of an issue with War Thunder. Like, do you remember back in the day, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where we had AI planes running about, and they had unlimited fuel, unlimited ammunition, and they'd chase you across the map like at 400 kilometers an hour in a biplane and all that?
Yeah, that was funny. That was very strange that was possible. But we're past those days. At least that is that. But what I really find disappointing sometimes is that nothing really seems to transition over from enduring confrontation. So like you said, they have been working on it for an extremely long time, but you would imagine, or at least I would expect, that something would transition over. Like I've seen one new map with railroads, but they are stagnated cars sitting somewhere on the rail, and then again, people just go there and kill those train wagons. But it's not dynamic; it's just static. And the dynamic element of enduring confrontation, some of the things really work well in enduring confrontation, and people actually say that this is fun, do something with this. This should be in the regular matchmaker, and then you're not seeing anything back. And their argument is, we don't want to break anything in the regular matchmaker. And I say, okay, I can understand that, but some of the things really work well and are not very difficult to implement, and it would make a huge difference only for the community to actually see them changing things, and it would give a positive vibe with a lot of the player base to see things actually trickle down from the enduring confrontation testing phase to actually being in the rotation on the maps where we can actually play it every day. That would be good.
Yeah, when I think about it, I kind of see it in a way how ships are right now. Because ships, once again, they're another thing which has had pretty much the same amount of development as, or at least time, I should say, as the enduring confrontation mode. But what they're doing with ships is they're making sure that they're having every nation have a tree before it's released. If you look at any of the the unofficial patch notes or what's on the dev server at specific times, or even, the events they run with ships, what you find is they are testing out each nation, and they're not going to release it before the whole of each nation is complete. Now, when we look at enduring confrontation, it seems like they're doing the same thing. They want to perfect it before they either transition certain elements or decide to make RBEC a thing or anything like that. And I think it would be much better just to take some of the concepts, like you said, that we know work well and are positive in the community, to move them over now into RB, or at least test them on some of the older maps. Because we are definitely seeing a drop in the AirRB player base. And it's generally around rank 4 and up, because that's the places where you don't get a ton of new people in. Generally, they're around rank 1 to 3. And then from there, they either push on or they decide that they don't want to be in the game anymore. And it would be nice just to see some elements taken, instead of a whole complete change, full game mode change, just a few of the elements moved over to at least try and solve some of the issues with, as you said, the dynamicism, or whatever that word is. I'm not even sure if that is a word. The dynamicism? Yeah, sure, let's go with that. Of the whole game mode. But there are definitely other issues as well with it. And one of the ones that, we've talked about in the past is the idea that you do have an issue with PR with Gaijin, but would you say that that has at least improved over the last, well, let's say in 2018?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What you see is you see more and more interaction between Gaijin and the community, and especially I think that's, at least that's my feeling, that they're actually watching a lot of videos from YouTube creators that say sensible things and are how do you call that, constructive and thoughtful in their comments. And what I see is that when there is a problem with a plane that they just released, they are much more likely to adjust that plane very, very quickly. And in the past, for example, years ago, it took years. It took sometimes years for them to adjust the plane or to pick up feedback from the player base and actually do something with it. And you really see them improving on that the last year. Whether that's enough for many of the old players that have already left, or that are still, a little bit pessimistic, they will take on any weird comment any moderator on the forum says, and they will take it as the way the whole of Gaijin does, because they have always worked in that way, and they've always put aside player base comments and ideas. And that has been a problem for Gaijin in the past. They really were, at least I see it that way, a Russian company that was like, okay, this is our roadmap, we're going to go for this, and anything that's said that doesn't fit that, we don't like that, and we're going to push that away. But by pushing that away, you really alienate a lot of your player base, and it's much better to pick it up and to at least tell them. I never understood why they were not more open about their plans. Like, what is wrong with saying, okay, guys, our plan is to do this the next coming years. We're going to start with, for example, with tanks. We want to bring out these and these trees. Then we're going to go to naval. In the meantime, we're going to do this tree for the air, and Italy and France. That's coming. And when that's all together, we're going to work on World War mode, and then we're going to go here. We're going to adjust the game a little bit. We're going to work on the existing modes. And if you actually say that, and you say that with, okay, that's the plan, whether it will all come out in time is a question, because development time is always, shifting. Something may go wrong, but that is what you basically can expect from us, and that's where we're going. And if you have feedback on it, put it here, and we'll do something with it if we can. If you bring it like that, then you put your player base on board, and if they see that you're actually doing stuff with it, then you get a participating player base. They never did that, but the last year and a half, I do see slowly that they're coming out from their past Soviet style of PR. I don't want to insult them, but it was really not a modern style of public relations in which they were managing it. And the last year, I think they've been doing much better. But like I said, whether it's enough, I hope so, and I hope they can bring in a lot of old players again with this management style. But I don't know how you see that.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about the other day is the fact that I was thinking about the content that I know that's going to be coming this year, and I compared it to any time last year or in the last 4 years. Was there ever a time where I knew that this amount of content, so as you said, World War mode is coming at some point. It's being tested. We know it's being tested. Rank 6 tanks was something that was never even talked about last year before they showed them at Gamescom. Now we know specific vehicles such as the M1A1 and the Leopard 2, which aren't in the game, but we know that they're coming at some point this year. There is also other vehicles that they've talked about that they're going to be adding. There is different game modes that they've talked about working on in relation to World War mode. They've also been doing stuff like the video, the dev video commentaries, which is something that I believe 1 year, I think we got one of them at the end of the year, basically recapping it, but we had 2 already this year. Basically talking about their plans going forward and their general thoughts on everything. And I do agree completely about the Soviet style. I call it the door-locked style, where you don't know what's going on until somebody throws something out the window, you pick it up off the ground, and you're like, oh, okay. Kind of like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, something like that. where the stuff just comes out, but
Yeah.
yeah, nowadays it's a hell of a lot better than it was, which is great. But at the same time, because of that, we have another issue which is caused by it, and that is the community backlash whenever something is either not done on time or is, or let's say, was presumed to come out at some point and has to be delayed, or people have a belief that it should already be out and therefore it gets delayed. And the prime example of this is ships, where everybody basically says, why isn't ships out yet? And this is the other side of the coin, and it's, do you want to live with that as the game development company, or would you rather close the doors and not deal with any of the backlash? I think what they're doing right now is completely correct. They're being open about their plans in the future, what they're working on, and it can give people who either are veteran players or are new players an idea of what's going on for the future, and if they want to stick around or not, instead of just being confused all the time and not sure what's going on, which is, you never want to be in that state of mind. If you're a content creator, if you're a player, if you're anybody really to do with anything in life.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, I agree with you. The player entitlement that you create with this new style, it does happen, and I mean, that really depends on what kind of player base you're growing, and because they have shut them out for so long, players are much more willing now to just poke at Gaijin and to give their feedback in a critical way, or in a completely out of this world way where you yeah, I mean, you have so much whining on the forums that I don't even believe it. Small example of today, which we talked about earlier, is a guy that I met in my Yak 23 today. He was in an ME262. We have a head-on. We shoot at each other. He misses all his shot completely. I shoot him out of the sky, and he starts whining in the chat like, "Oh yeah, here we go. Russian bias. Two 23 millimeter cannons do more damage than my four 30 millimeter cannons." And I say back to him, I say, "Dude, you didn't even hit me. I mean, you're blaming the game. You're blaming guys." And he was really he was using foul language. There were a lot of dots there. And he said like, what is this? It does more damage than my 430 millimeters. And that kind of entitlement where you immediately you blame the game, you blame Gaijin for your own bad aim. And I can't stand that. I really can't stand that. If you want to give feedback and criticism and you take your own responsibility, then it should be a positive way between the community and between Gaijin. And the way they're going now, I think that will be strengthened. I think more and more people will jump on that ship, especially the people who love the game and who want to see it go forward. I think the game is still without comparison. The amount of vehicles in the game, the amount of content there is, both planes, vehicles, and soon the naval branch of the game. It is simply astounding what they're trying to do here. And if they are showing signs that they want to improve, they want to do better, then I'm certainly on board. And the players with their little entitlement and their screaming and whining, just like that guy I met in my Yak 23 today, they will fall by the wayside and never to be seen again, because those people are the same people who will who want a better battle rating for the planes they like. But if anything else gets above, then they're screaming about it. So I don't really care about those people, to be honest.
Well, it reminds me of, well, first of all, with a free-to-play game, you're always going to have that sector, right, which tries to dictate to the company what to do. And this was a big failure of a game that I really enjoyed, which was Paragon. And what happened in Paragon is they started listening to a very small set of players in the game, and that alienated everybody else. So what is nice to see from Gaijin is that, first of all, they're not doing that, and they're also using the argument which everybody should use, which is whenever somebody brings up the community as a talking point, it can just be stricken down straight away to say not everyone has the same opinion. Because you can have, let's say, a Reddit post, a forum post, a big swath of the community which is talking about one topic and they want it changed. But you can never tell if that is the majority or not, or if it's just a very vocal minority, which 99% of the time it is, and you cannot listen to that vocal minority over the majority of your players. So I think right now what they're doing is completely correct. And I hope I can find it, but Anton actually answered a bunch of questions on a thread ages ago on the War Thunder Reddit, and he actually brought up something that you talked about. So there was an idea, this is kind of a side point, but I think it's worth getting into. There was an idea a few years ago that a couple of the more experienced players wanted to get together a group of about 100 people, or around about that, and what they wanted to do, they would be playtesters, they would be able to give information before stuff was released, they would be able to report bugs and everything like that. And Gaijin actually tested this with a set of players, and what they found out was all those players basically did was want the vehicles they enjoyed lowered in BR, and they wanted basically rewards to go through the roof, because they wanted everybody to have a ton of silver lions and a ton of research, and then they basically just cut it off and said, well, this is pointless. And that to me was just something that really stood out. I'll try and find it and link it in the description. But anyway, let's go on to another point, which I think is incredibly important and does mix with another one that we can branch off to. BRs of aircraft are something which, for me, do not get manipulated enough. I feel like, for me personally, every 3 or 4 months when certain vehicles do get changed, I feel like some of them are incredibly obvious from maybe even a week or two into them once they're released. And maybe there could be something maybe every month where specific vehicles are looked at and to see if their BR's been changed. Like, do you think the current system they do now, which is basically a 3 to 4 month period of testing they do on specific vehicles, like the Yak 23, a video you just did, that recently got its BR changed, after a very long time. But do you think it would be better if BRs were much more fluid in how they work, or do you prefer the whole matchmaking system how it is in general?
Well, let's start off with the fact that I think if you look at the amount of planes they have and the amount of nations and trying to balance that, not an easy thing. And it's very difficult to find a system that would work perfectly. There's never really a perfect answer for that. That being said, I think they can do more with fluid battle ranges, especially on the planes themselves. Like, for example, a different battle rating for a plane that's stock compared to the battle rating of that same plane when it's spaded. I think if you, for example, unlock the whole tier 1 in modifications, that a plane should jump a 0.3 in battle rating, and again when you unlock the second stage, that's a way they could do it for bridging the gap between a stock plane and a spaded plane. I think that is a big frustration for people in the grind. I mean, my opinion of the grind is don't grind and play what you want and enjoy and let things unlock by themselves. I made a video about that once, but the grind is something that pushes a lot of players out of the game, because people start this game, they think, oh, I want that P80, or oh, I want the MA262. They're going for that, and they're consistently flying stock planes because they are unlocking something new. They go to that new plane and they get disappointed. And I mean, Gaijin, if I was them, I would want a lot of players to stick. And one of the bigger problems of Gaijin as well is the player retention that they have. There's a lot of drop-off in the new people that come in, and there is only a very small percentage that sticks to the game. And that is something they need to look at, because at a certain point you ran through all the new available players, and then you're gonna be left with the people that have stayed. And I think they can do a lot with that in the battle rating system. Overall, if you look at the problems in the battle ratings right now, You have tier 5, which is a real problem with the top tier jets sitting at 9.0. Every plane you make 8.0 immediately has a problem with the up tiers to 9.0 because of all the Hunters, the CL13s, the F2s, and all that jazz. I think they need to look at tier 5 especially, make 9.3, 9.7, and viable 8.3 and 8.7. Then the 7.3 and 7.7 also become viable, and then you have a lot more fluidity in tier 5. Of course, there's a few blatant examples of planes that are over-tiered or under-tiered before that, like the bolts that everybody's complaining about. But what I want to say about that, I think up until tier 5, everything is pretty much playable, and there's always going to be a best plane. If it's not the Hitler bolt and the other bolts, it's going to be a Spitfire. And if it's not the Spitfires, it's going to be a BF-109. What people have to realize is that there are times and phases where one plane reigns supreme. Then there's so much complaining that plane is going to have his head cut off, let's say, and then there's some other plane that's going to rise to the top. Everybody's going to play that, and that's going to be complained about, and it cycles, And what you just got to realize is that you got to learn how to fight these planes. I shoot Hitler bolts down whatever I play, whatever nation, and I don't want to sound elitist or something, but if you know your plane and you know a bolt, for example, then you also know what you have to do to kill that bolt. And that is what people have to focus on, in my eyes, when it comes to battle rating. Stop complaining and start working on yourself. That's way more important than the plane. And there's always going to be some plane that's going to be overpowered, whether it's a Hitler bolt or something else. Take away the air spawn off the Hitler bolt is done. It's going to be dominated by other planes. But that's the way it's going to be, always.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've made videos in the past talking about the idea of how stock vehicles should not have the same BR as their fully done-up vehicles, and I think that would be a great thing to implement. Something that is a little bit more controversial that you brought up here, but I think I was a bit more direct about it when I talked about it, was the human element of matchmaking, which is pretty much what you said, where people are going to gravitate what is going to help them win because they want to win. It's human nature. You're going to always try and gravitate towards that best plane, and then everybody facing that is going to complain about it instead of trying to self-improve to face it. There have been planes in the past which have had a ridiculous reputation of being incredibly good. And what happens is, over time, maybe a week or so, when people start figuring it out, you realize that it isn't as good as everybody says. And a great example of this recently is either update 1.77 or 7.5 when the LA200 was released. A lot of people were saying this thing was going to annihilate everything. It should be at 9.0 straight away. And when I looked at it, all I saw was a massive MiG-17 with worse guns. And to be honest, you never see them in the air anymore. At all. They're just not there at all. One thing that I would like to bring up is I've dabbled with this idea, and for propellers and jets, my mind is set. So what I want is just a straight wall between propeller aircraft and jet aircraft. There could be a little bit of crossover. HE-162 comes to mind, maybe some of the early Yaks, the Yak jets like the Yak-15, and the Yak-17. But what about walls between the specific eras of jets that they've talked about? So if you have an 8.0 jet, it can only face 8.0s. Now obviously this would screw a bit with queue times, but generally if you're at that level anyway, I feel like you should have a little bit of patience in order to be able to wait for that perfect match.
That's an interesting proposition. I don't necessarily 100% agree with it because I really like a little bit of historic correctness as well, in the sense that I always loved the stories of pilots with the P-51s that saw the first ME-262s and stuff. It's a bit of the romantic side from me. It is difficult to balance that gameplay-wise, and that is also a huge thing with the realists. You have a large contingent of the player base that really likes the realism and wants to see all the proper historical matchups and see those all the time. And those people go into, oh, look at this, 1940 plane against a 1944 plane, a Gaijin, blah, 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 this and that. I realize for Gaijin it is impossible to get both balance and historical correctness and get that at the same time and make it work in the game. That's impossible. That's a given already from the start. So for Gaijin, it's already impossible to please everybody. That they then choose for balance is, I completely agree with that. Balance is way more important than the historical side, although it doesn't have to be pulled completely out of whack. That's why I think a wall would be a little bit too much for me personally. I still think that you can do a lot with a bear can against the 7.0 jets. I had a lot of videos about the Bearcat, and you shoot the jets down every time. You just need to be more patient, and you need to be on your toes. And that's, again, it comes back to how willing are you as a player to improve yourself and to be in the how do you call that, the disadvantaged side. So you're gonna take a Bearcat into the game, into the matchmaker. You know you have a pretty good chance to face jets. Do you want that? Do you want that challenge? Do you choose for that challenge, or do you want to pick the perfect 7.0 plane and seal club the props that you face? What do you want? What is your purpose in the game? I always like to face the challenge and get that plane and just see what I can do. And that's what makes you a better pilot. But that blood, sweat, and tears path that you can take to self-improvement, it is not walked that path by a big percentage of the community, unfortunately.
Well, what's that saying where people will always take the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least they'll try to, I should say.
Yeah, unfortunately, and we see it. I mean, look at the Hitler Bolt spam that wiped through the community the last 2 months. It has been astounding, and that is just because the Hitler Bolt made Silver Lions, made progress in the German tree very, very easy. And yeah, you see it immediately, and you see that with all things when they come up as being the best plane. Like you said, people gravitate towards that, and you're gonna get complaints from the other side, and there we go again. That
Yeah.
plane again gets nerfed, and then the next plane comes up,
And the cycle continues.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for me, when it comes to the historical side of it all, what I would like is, with Air Realistic, to try, and it doesn't have to be historical in my head. It just has to be balanced in a way, and then the historical side comes in when World War Mode comes out with its operations, which are historical operations. So you can, I'm sure if they create a scenario where you have P-51s versus ME-262s, and then also in events. Something that has been lost for me is, an easy example is the Flight of the Swallows event, which used to be on quite a lot, a few years ago. I have no idea where that event went. They just decided to take it out, maybe because everybody wanted to play 262s. But for there, you can definitely balance by number, whereas in an aerialistic battle, that unfortunately isn't something that you can do. But for me, when it comes to the Bearcat analogy that you brought up, I love facing jets in the F8 F1B, because I don't know what it is about that aircraft, but jets players do not know how to face it, and never have. It's incredibly easy to fight, but for some reason they cock it up every time, and the Bearcat's able to get shots off on it. I just wish that when it came to stuff like that, there would be some kind of way, I don't even know if you could do this, but there would be some kind of way where if you have 5 matches where you're up tiered, you could have then 5 matches down tiered, but I don't think that could ever work, depending on the popularity of BRs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be very difficult as well, as you are really dependent on who is in the queue at that time and what planes they have selected.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be asking a little bit too much. You would need a Herculaic player base to be able to do that. You'd need some ridiculous size to be able to pull that off. So let's start wrapping this up. We've obviously talked about the issues, we've talked about some solutions, we've talked about, general things. How about we pose this question? So in a year's time, let's say we're in 2019, mid of the year, what changes would you like to see worked on this year going into next year for AirRB?
The most important thing is that they start to introduce diversity and the differences in matches. Like you have certain maps, everything is the same right now. We need different objectives. We need fluidity in the game. What I hope to see is an introduction, what they have in tanks as well right now, where you have 3 vehicles of your choice in one RB match, and you can choose it according to the map you get. If there is different objectives in every map, then you're going to go in a bomber in one point, you're going to go in an attacker in another map, and you're going to go in your fighter in another map, and maybe change it around as to how the map develops. I want to see easy kind of missions where they put in vehicles, they put in trains, where you can go after those things, and it really diversifies the gameplay. I also hope to see that they take away the destruction of airfields as a final end to all the matches, and make a more dynamic thing where every map has a certain kind of events and a certain goal towards like a quest series. What I also want to see is ability for a team to actually gain tickets. For example, when you lose your airfield, there a column appears which will make another airfield, and if you can get that column to that place safely, then you will get an airfield back, for example, and you gain tickets back. That kind of thing would seem wonderful to me, and I hopefully they can put their creativity to work and think of a few or all of those kind of things, and maybe a few things that they think of themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said there. The only different, whatever that word is again, the only thing I would change would be to put it in an EC setting. So instead of having the three aircraft lineup, instead you just set it up as it is in Enduring Confrontation. And I understand it has its own issues, especially with airfield camping, but if there's enough airfields, you can't camp every single damn airfield. So that's how I see it going. There just needs to be more going on in a flexible sense on the map itself. And if I load into, let's say, a map such as Advance to the Rhine, which is the one you were talking about, which has the stationary train cars, I can load into it one time, and then the next time, let's say I load into it again, it's in a different scenario. Stuff is placed in different places. The airfields are in different places. Everything feels different, even though it is technically the same map. That, to me, would be if they can somehow create that idea, even if they just created 5 different templates for each of the different maps and just went like that, that would be a wonderful start over what we have now, where it's literally, okay, I'm on this map, I know where the bombers are going to be, I know where the attackers are going to be, I know where the fighters are going to be, I know how to do this, and I've known how to do it for about 3 years. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But
no, absolutely.
Yeah, it would be nice, just as you said, just a bit of dynamicism with the whole thing. But anyway, I think we'll bring this to the close. Do you have any final words for the talk?
No, I absolutely. This is the major thing, and if they can pull that off, I mean, what you said, it for me, it shouldn't be completely Enduring Confrontation, because it takes too long. I just want. Sometimes I have an hour to fly, and I just want 2 matches, and that's it. And I have my question marks about World War Mode as well, because what you said is true. Mostly ground forces, sometimes an air combat is possible, but how am I going to sit there in World War Mode when I'm only playing aircraft? But that's another thing. World War Mode is another discussion on the whole. But I hope what we talked about they will implement, and that they revive the mode, and people will come back. New players will be locked to the game more in a bigger percentage, and hope that player retention becomes much better for the game, and we'll see the game grow if they do that, I think.
I hope so. Dynamicism always seems to work pretty well in any game it touches. But anyway, if you want to go and see Jengar's channel, there will be a link in the description that you can go to. Just click on it, and there you go. You can see all of his wonderful content. We've been here doing this talk. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.